The CEO spent every Christmas alone in his mansion until a lost little twin girl showed up with a handmade gift. Every Christmas Eve, for the past 6 years, Dennis Carrington stood in the same place, at the tall bay window of his mansion in Snowberry, Vermont, glass of untouched brandy in hand, watching the snow fall thick and silent across the quiet town. The scene outside was postcard perfect, rooftops dusted white, chimneys exhaling ribbons of smoke, the occasional jingle of distant bells. Inside, however, his world was still, sterile, as if time itself had frozen. The grand Carrington estate was known throughout the region, a symbol of power, wealth, and success. But behind its gated entrance and sweeping marble halls lived a man whose heart had long since shut its doors. At 35, Dennis had built a multi-million-dollar tech empire. He was a man of precision, efficiency, and solitude. And in Snowberry, he was known simply as the recluse at the top of Pine Ridge Hill. No one came to visit. No lights adorned the house. The only decoration was a tall, silver artificial tree standing in the corner of his living room, perfectly symmetrical, untouched at its base. There were no presents beneath it. There never were. His wife, Claire, and their unborn son had died in a car crash on Christmas Eve. That memory was now etched into his every December, like frost on glass, sharp, cold, permanent. Outside, the snow fell heavier than usual this year. Thick flakes danced past the window, swirling in the glow of the lanterns along the driveway. Dennis took a sip of his drink, the warmth never quite reaching past his throat. He exhaled slowly and turned away, heading toward the fireplace that never burned anymore. Then, it came. 3 soft knocks on the front door. Dennis froze. No one ever knocked on his door, not at night, and certainly not on Christmas Eve. He waited, unsure if it was his imagination. Then came another knock, a little louder this time, followed by a faint scuffling noise. Cautiously, he walked through the entry hall, his footsteps echoing on the polished stone floor. At the door, he paused. For a long moment, he simply listened. Then, slowly, he opened it. A gust of frigid air swept into the hall. And there, standing on the snow-dusted welcome mat, were 2 little girls, no taller than his knee, no older than 3. Their cheeks were flushed pink from the cold, golden curls peeking out beneath their wool hats. Each wore a pink dress layered under puffy coats and red gloves. In the smallest girl's hands was a lopsided, hand-wrapped box with crooked red ribbon. They blinked up at him with big blue eyes. One of them stepped forward and spoke, her voice high and sweet, trembling from the chill. "We brought a present for Santa, but we got lost," she said. "Is this his house?" Dennis stared, completely at a loss. The other girl nodded solemnly, holding up the small box as if it were a priceless treasure. "Mommy said Santa lives in the nicest house on the street," she explained. "Yours is the biggest. So it must be you." Dennis opened his mouth, but no words came out. Snowflakes clung to the girl's lashes. Their boots were soaked. A shiver ran visibly through the smaller twin's body, but she still held out the gift, determined. He looked down at the package, wrapped in tissue paper, taped too many times, and adorned with a hand-drawn sticker that read, "To Mr. Santa, love, Ella and Ivy." Dennis swallowed hard. He had no idea what to say to 2 lost children with pink bows and hearts on their mittens who thought he was Santa Claus. So instead, for the first time in 6 years, he simply knelt down to their level, his voice quieter than he expected. "Why don't you come inside?" he said gently. "It's freezing out here." The girls looked at each other, then back at him. "You're not mad?" Ivy whispered. "No," Dennis said softly. "Not at all." They smiled. And as he stepped aside, letting them cross the threshold, something changed. The silence in his house shifted, no longer empty, but waiting. And Dennis, for the first time in a very long time, was no longer alone. The warmth of the fireplace had just begun to fill the entryway when hurried footsteps crunched through the snow outside. Ella, Ivy. A woman's voice, urgent, trembling with panic. The twins perked up instantly. "Mommy!" they cried in unison. Dennis turned toward the door just as a figure appeared on the porch, breathless and red-cheeked, her blonde hair spilling out from beneath a knit cap. Her coat flapped open. One boot was zipped, the other barely on, and her gloveless hands were shaking. "Oh, thank God," she gasped, falling to her knees and wrapping her arms around both girls. "I've been looking everywhere for you." The twins clung to her, giggling. "We were giving Santa his present," Ivy explained proudly, pointing at Dennis. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes met Dennis's and widened, recognizing someone who looked vaguely familiar. "I'm so sorry," she said, standing up quickly and brushing snow from her jeans. "They're mine. We just moved in, little blue house down the street, the one with the bunny wreath. I turned around for a second and they were gone." She tried to catch her breath, the relief pouring out of her like melted snow. "We were delivering handmade gifts. It's our tradition. New town, new neighbors." Dennis studied her carefully. She looked to be in her late 20s, her face tired but kind. She held herself with strength, but he could see the panic just beneath the surface. Her coat was thin, fraying at the sleeves. The girls clung to her hands now, talking over each other with excitement. "I'm Melissa. Melissa Brooks," she said quickly. "And again, I'm really, truly sorry for the intrusion." Dennis shook his head. "It's all right," he said, voice calm and even. "They were very respectful guests." She smiled then, a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment crossing her face. "Still, I hope they didn't bother you too much." "They didn't," he said. He hesitated. He wasn't used to company, especially not from strangers who called him Santa and left glitter on his floor. But something about the way Melissa had rushed in, barefoot in snow, arms outstretched for her daughters, something about it all stayed with him. "It's cold," he said. "Would you like to come in? Just to warm up?" Melissa blinked. "Only if you're sure," she said softly. "We didn't mean to bother you." "You didn't," he replied, stepping aside and opening the door wider. Inside, warmth spread around them. Melissa helped the girls remove their coats and mittens near the stairs. She looked around, visibly stunned. "This place is stunning," she said. The walls were ivory stone, the floors polished wood, everything neat, too neat, the kind of neat that whispered of years without children. In the dining room, a formal table was set for one. A single plate with untouched vegetables, a crystal glass of water. The fireplace crackled gently nearby. Melissa tilted her head. "You were eating alone?" Dennis nodded. The twins wandered toward the tall silver tree, eyes wide. Ella pointed. "There's no cookies." Ivy looked around. "No cocoa either." Melissa laughed softly. "They believe Christmas isn't real without cookies and cocoa." Dennis gave a slight smile. "Noted." Then Ella reached into her pink coat pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of construction paper. "This is for you," she said, holding it out. He took it gingerly. Inside was a drawing of stick figures under a huge snowflake. Scrawled in bright pink crayon were the words, "Merry Christmas, Mr. Lonely." Dennis stared at the card for several seconds. Then something inside him shifted, a quiet crack across the ears. To his surprise, he laughed. A soft, low laugh, but real. The twins beamed. Melissa raised her eyebrows, surprised. "Mr. Lonely," he murmured, then walked slowly to the unlit fireplace and propped the card on the mantel. It didn't match the decor, messy, loud, childish. But suddenly, the whole room felt warmer. "Thank you," he said. Melissa smiled, her eyes shining. "You're welcome." And for the first time in 6 long winters, Dennis Carrington felt something change. Not an ending, but the beginning of something gentle. Something real. It had been a week since Christmas Eve, but Dennis Carrington found himself driving slowly past the little tailoring shop at the edge of Main Street more often than he cared to admit. The place was modest. White brick with a green awning and a hand-painted sign that read, "Little Stitches." Through the window, he could see a familiar head of golden hair bent over a sewing machine, and two tiny figures in pink dresses chasing each other around the racks of fabric. Melissa Brooks worked part-time at the shop, hemming pants, altering old coats, and, when she had a spare minute, sewing handmade clothes for her daughters. She told him once she could not afford to buy new dresses for the twins, so she sewed them by hand, always pink, always soft, always with love. That day, Dennis told himself he just happened to be passing by. But when he opened the shop door and the little bell jingled, he saw the way the girls lit up like lanterns. "Mr. Lonely," one of them squealed, running to hug his leg. He chuckled despite himself. "You remember my name?" "No," the other giggled. "But Mommy said that's what you are." Melissa, who had looked up in surprise, rushed over, flustered. "Girls, that's not polite." "It's all right," Dennis said, smiling at her. "I suppose it's better than grumpy suit guy." Melissa laughed softly, brushing a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "What brings you here?" He held up a paper cup. "I brought you coffee. Thought you might need a break." She stared at it for a moment, touched. "That's very thoughtful. Thank you." Then, turning to the girls, Dennis pulled two small pink boxes from his coat pocket. Inside each was a simple hair bow, satin and sparkling just enough to catch the light. "For the ladies," he said, kneeling down. The twins gasped. "Pink! They match our dresses!" one shouted. Melissa looked down, speechless for a moment. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said simply. "They've given me more smiles than I've had in years." Over the next week, Dennis found himself returning to the shop more often, sometimes with lunch, sometimes just to say hello. He would sit on the small bench by the window, sipping coffee while the girls played and Melissa worked. One afternoon, he came in without warning and found Melissa sitting alone behind the counter. One of the pink dresses lay across her lap, its hem torn, the fabric frayed. She held a needle between trembling fingers. Her eyes were red. He froze in the doorway. Melissa quickly wiped her face and tried to smile. "Oh, hi. I didn't hear the bell. I just stopped by," he said, uncertain. She nodded, looking down. One of the girls tripped. Again. "I keep stitching this same spot. It won't last much longer." He saw the way her hands shook, the tiredness in her face, the way she folded the dress, gently, as if afraid it might fall apart. He did not say anything. He just nodded, quietly stepped back, and left. The next morning, before the shop opened, Melissa arrived to unlock the door and found a brown paper bag resting against it. No note, no label. Inside were rolls of soft pink fabric, spools of quality thread, and 3 new sewing needles. She stood there in the doorway for a long time, the morning sun hitting her golden hair, her fingers brushing over the cloth like it was something sacred. She did not need a name to know who had left it. From across the street, behind the tinted window of a parked car, Dennis watched her smile and press the fabric to her chest. For the first time in years, he felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fireplace at home. It was something else, something new, something quietly beginning. Snowberry shimmered in late December. The streets glowed with strings of golden lights, wreaths hung from every door, and children's laughter echoed through the square as the town prepared for its annual Christmas Eve festival. Every house on Pine Hollow Road sparkled with decorations, except one. Dennis Carrington's mansion, as always, remained dark. No lights, no music, no wreath on the door. Just a tall, silver tree inside, standing like a sculpture, perfect, still, and silent. He stood by the window, sipping black coffee, watching as neighbors bustled by with bags of wrapped gifts and trays of cookies. The cheer was loud, contagious, and yet he stayed behind the glass, a man apart from the world, until a soft knock broke the silence. It was not the door. It was two small fists tapping against the window, just low enough to belong to someone under 4 feet tall. Dennis blinked. The twins stood outside the gate, cheeks red from the cold, pink coats puffed up like cotton candy. They waved enthusiastically. He opened the door. "Are you two delivering cookies again?" "Nope," one girl grinned. "We came to ask something," said the other. He knelt to their level. "And what is that?" They glanced at each other, then back at him with wide eyes. "Don't you have anyone to eat Christmas with, Mr. Lonely?" Dennis was silent. One of the girls frowned. "That's sad." "Very sad," the other added, crossing her arms. "Mom says Christmas is for sharing." Later that evening, Dennis walked into Little Stitches and cleared his throat awkwardly. Melissa looked up from the sewing table, her golden hair in a loose braid. "Dennis?" He rubbed the back of his neck. The girls invited themselves over. "For Christmas Eve." Her eyes widened. "I mean," he stumbled, "I was wondering if you'd all like to come to dinner at my place." She blinked. "Really?" He nodded, shyly. "I'll cook, or try." On Christmas Eve, for the first time in 6 years, the Carrington mansion glowed. Lights wrapped around the banister. Candles flickered on the windowsills. The tall silver tree in the corner now wore pink bows, paper snowflakes, and a giant hand-cut star glued together by 2 excited 3-year-olds. The air smelled of cinnamon and pine. Laughter echoed through the once silent halls. Melissa stepped through the front door, holding the girls' coats, eyes wide. Her simple white dress brushed the floor. Her blonde hair flowed gently over her shoulders, catching the light. Dennis stood frozen. "You look," he began. She blushed slightly. "I didn't have anything fancy." He shook his head. "You look perfect." The girls ran to the tree, squealing. "Our decorations made it. Look, the bows at the top." Dennis led them to the dining room. 3 plates, silverware polished, a centerpiece made of fir branches and ribbon. As Melissa sat down, she paused. Her eyes widened. "Is that?" "Mom's cinnamon pie," Dennis said, setting it carefully on the table. "You mentioned it once. Thought I'd try." Her throat tightened. "My mom used to bake that every Christmas." "I know." She looked at him, and for a long moment, she said nothing. Then softly, "You remembered?" He nodded. She smiled, barely able to hold back tears. "Dennis, I didn't think you noticed." "I notice more than people think," he said quietly. The twins cheered, already digging into mashed potatoes. Melissa reached across the table, her fingers grazing his. "Thank you. For tonight. For this." He met her eyes, and for once, the silence between them was warm, familiar. That night, as the fire crackled and snow fell outside, the house that once echoed with emptiness was filled instead with laughter, the rustle of pink skirts, and the smell of cinnamon pie. And for the first time in years, Dennis Carrington did not feel alone. The phone rang as Melissa tucked the twins into bed. Slowly she answered. On the other end was a man's voice she hadn't heard in many years. "Melissa Brooks? It's Daniel Rivers. I'd like to see my daughters." Her heart stopped. She stared at her own reflection in the darkened hallway mirror, hair slightly disheveled, eyes tired from years of worry, hands still faintly stained from last week's hemming job. She did not respond. A second ring came, and she let it go to voicemail. The next morning, a letter arrived, official-looking, with a government seal, petition for visit and custody rights. At the bottom, Daniel's name, bold, demanding. Panic rose, cold and sudden. Melissa stood in her sewing shop, little stitches, surrounded by fabric scraps and warm light, watching the twins play in their pink dresses. She felt vulnerable. She had no savings, no lawyer, just faith and the daily rhythms of survival. Dennis Carrington entered under the guise of browsing fabric. She looked up and saw his expression shift, something like worry. He greeted her quietly. "Melissa, may I speak with you outside for a moment?" Minutes later, they were seated in his car. He reached into the glove compartment and handed her a card. "This is a lawyer I retain, full service. Your daughters, should not face this alone." Tears gathered. "I cannot," she began. "But you will," he said gently. "I want to help." At the hearing, the courtroom felt cold. Melissa and the twins sat in the gallery. Daniel sat across, confident, professional-looking, his lawyer whispering. Dennis entered and took a seat beside her with no fanfare. When the judge asked for the father's statement, Daniel rose. He spoke of responsibility, rights, abandonment. His tone harsh. "I have returned because I must provide for my children." Melissa's voice quivered when it was her turn. She told the story of Newtown, handmade dresses, winter nights, 2 girls lost in the snow knocking on a stranger's door. She spoke of love, of fear, of what she had built from nothing. She looked to Dennis when she paused, and he nodded once. Then the judge asked for character witness. Dennis stood, suit impeccable, but his voice soft. "I am Dennis Carrington. I own Carrington Technologies. But tonight I am here for 2 little girls who wear pink dresses and 2 small hearts that brought me home. Miss Brooks has been more than a resilient mother. She has been their world. They did not just save one lonely man this holiday season. They gave him a family that he never believed he deserved." He glanced briefly at the twins, who watched wide-eyed. "I will never serve as a substitute father, if that is all I ever will be, but I will stand as their guardian in every quiet moment that matters." The gallery fell silent. Melissa wept openly. For the first time she understood. She had not carried this burden alone. Not anymore. When the verdict was read, the judge granted primary custody to Melissa, with supervised visitation to Daniel. He thanked Dennis discreetly afterwards. The twins ran out into the hallway, pink dresses swirling, hugging him. Outside, the winter wind burned against their cheeks. Dennis wrapped his coat around Melissa's shoulders. "You did it," he said. She nodded, tears freezing as they fell. "I couldn't have," she whispered. Dennis pressed his lips against her forehead. "You never had to face it by yourself." As they walked away, the snow fell softly, and for the first time in his mansion's history, the front door felt like an entrance to something that mattered. That night, the snow had softened into a gentle fall, blanketing the streets of Snowberry in a hush of white. Dennis held the car door open as the twins scrambled out, giggling, their pink dresses tucked under heavy coats. They darted ahead, leaving tiny footprints behind them as they ran up the path to Melissa's porch. Melissa followed slowly, her breath fogging in the air, the quiet of evening settling around them like a secret. Dennis walked beside her, hands tucked into his coat pockets. For once, he was not in a suit, just a dark sweater and jeans. He looked human, still sharp, still composed, but warmer somehow. They reached the porch just as the twins burst through the front door, shouting, "We're home!" and disappearing inside with the flurry of children who had just survived a courtroom storm. Melissa turned to thank him, but Dennis stopped her with a glance. "Can we talk?" "Just a minute," he asked softly. She nodded. They stood under the awning, porch light glowing gold above them, flakes of snow gathering in Melissa's hair. Dennis hesitated, then reached out and brushed a flake from her shoulder. His hand lingered just a second too long. "I used to think I didn't need anyone," he said, voice low and sure. "I built walls. I filled them with silence, with work, with everything except people." Melissa swallowed. Her heart beat hard in her chest. But then, he continued, eyes meeting hers, two little girls in pink dresses knocked on my door, and their mother stood there, tired, brave, kind. Suddenly, my house wasn't cold anymore. Suddenly, I wanted more. She blinked quickly, breath catching. Dennis, you don't have to do this. You've already done more than enough. We're okay now. You don't owe us. He stepped closer. This isn't about owing or duty. I am not doing this because I feel obligated. He paused, then added, with the clarity of someone who had rehearsed every word 100 times in silence. I'm doing this because I love you. Melissa's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes shimmered. I love the way you smile even when you're exhausted. I love the way you protect your girls like they're made of gold. I love how you still believe in kindness when the world gave you every reason not to. And every time I see you standing there, just like now, I remember what hope feels like. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. She reached out, resting her hand against his chest, over his heart. I never thought someone like you would say something like that, she whispered. Not to someone like me. There's no one else I'd say it to, he replied simply. At that, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. He held her tightly, head bowed, hands cradling her back like she was the most precious thing in the world. Snow drifted down around them, soft and quiet. From inside the house came the unmistakable sound of little feet running back to the door. The twins peeked out, eyes wide. Mommy's hugging Mr. Lonely, one whispered loudly. The other gasped, then squealed. Finally. Melissa laughed through her tears, lifting her head just enough to glance toward the door. Dennis smiled down at her, his voice a murmur only for her. No more lonely. Not anymore. She nodded, eyes shining. And under the falling snow, wrapped in each other's arms, two broken hearts slowly began to mend. Dennis carried 2 suitcases and the twins' pink backpacks into the foyer of his mansion, holding the door for Melissa. It was late afternoon, the winter light dimming quickly. For years, this house echoed only his footsteps. Now, it felt different. Melissa looked around, taking in the grand but sterile space. Thank you for doing this, she said quietly. I know I'm asking a lot. He gave a soft smile. You didn't ask. I invited. She hesitated, then nodded. His calmness eased her nerves. She dropped the bags, glancing at the twins, who ran ahead, wide-eyed. That's my room, one squealed, pointing to twin beds with pink quilts. And that's mine, said the other. Dennis watched them, something warm tugging in his chest. He turned to Melissa. Take your time, settling in. No rush. In the days that followed, the mansion began to change. The kitchen filled with the scent of cookies Melissa baked from the girls' favorite recipes. The halls echoed with laughter as the twins danced in their pink dresses. Christmas music floated from the living room, where handmade decorations appeared, paper snowflakes, pink ribbons, and a small tree the girls trimmed themselves. Evenings transformed. Dennis no longer ate alone in his study. Instead, he shared meals with Melissa and the twins by the fireplace. The girls chattered about school, Melissa gently correcting their stories with soft laughter. Afterward, Dennis read bedtime stories, fairy tales from an old book his mother once gave him. He knelt by their beds, voice low and warm. Melissa sat in the rocking chair, sewing a pink dress in the glow of the firelight. That image, Melissa stitching, her golden hair aglow, 2 little girls drifting to sleep, felt like something out of a dream Dennis had forgotten he ever wanted. Once, he would have managed everything alone. Repairs, planning, fixing. Now, he watched, supported, and let small moments fill the space he had thought would always be empty. One Saturday morning, Melissa brought out a sketchbook full of designs. "This is what I want to build," she said, turning pages. "A small shop, dresses, overalls, especially for twins." Dennis nodded. "Let me help with the finances." "You'll run it." "Your name on the door." She blinked in surprise. "You'd do that?" He smiled. "You deserve it." In the weeks that followed, they built something together. Dennis introduced her to a supplier. They visited fabric stores and drafted a business plan. He never pushed. He asked her opinion, stepped back when needed, always letting her lead. Melissa saw in him the same steady support he gave her daughters, and something deeper began to grow. One evening, snow tapped gently at the windows. The little Christmas tree in the breakfast room twinkled. Melissa stood watching Dennis carry storybooks toward the girls' room. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" he asked. "For making this feel like home." He slid an arm around her shoulders. They stood in silence, watching the twins giggle under blankets, whispering bedtime secrets. The fire crackled softly. The house, once silent and cold, now breathed like something alive. This was their new beginning, a home not built from grand gestures or rushed promises, but from warmth, trust, and the patient act of building a life together. Dennis Carrington had learned that real success was not measured in profits or prestige, but in laughter echoing through once empty halls, in small pink shoes by the door, and in the quiet comfort of being exactly where you are needed. A year had passed since the night Melissa and her daughters first appeared at Dennis Carrington's door. The town of Snowberry was once again wrapped in white, the snow falling softly like powdered sugar across rooftops, trees, and chapel bells. But this Christmas was different. Under a canopy of falling snow and strings of fairy lights, Dennis stood at the altar in the garden of his own estate, now transformed with white blooms and soft pink accents, just as the twins had requested. Guests, all close friends and family, were bundled in coats and scarves, smiling despite the cold. There was warmth here that no fire could rival. Melissa walked down the snowy aisle, her golden hair swept into an elegant bun, soft curls escaping at the nape of her neck. Her silk gown shimmered in the pale light, delicate lace wrapping around her growing belly. 4 months along, she glowed with the serenity of someone who had finally found home. Beside her, the twins danced ahead as flower girls in matching pink dresses, tossing petals with joyful abandon. Their cheeks were flushed from the cold, their curls bouncing with every step. When they reached the altar, they ran to Dennis and hugged his legs tightly before stepping aside with giggles. Dennis turned to Melissa, his eyes locking with hers. As he took her hand, his voice dropped to a whisper. "Thank you," he said, "for knocking on my door that night." Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but her smile never wavered. "No," she replied softly. "Thank you for opening it." The exchange of rings was quiet, intimate, and heartfelt. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the crowd cheered, and the twins shouted, "Finally!" again, drawing laughter from everyone present. Back at the Carrington estate, the once lonely mansion was aglow with candles and Christmas lights. Inside, the fire crackled, and the smell of cinnamon and sugar cookies filled the rooms. Melissa and Dennis entered hand in hand, still in wedding attire, their cheeks pink from the cold. In the living room, Dennis gently pulled Melissa into his arms. She rested her hand on her belly, and his hand joined hers. "She's growing fast," she said quietly. "Or he," Dennis teased. Melissa smiled. "Either way, we might need a third pink dress, or maybe blue this time." From the staircase, the twins peeked down and ran to them, giggling as they wrapped themselves around Melissa's waist. "Another pink dress is coming," one squealed. "We'll help take care of her." Dennis knelt to their level and looked them both in the eye. "You two are already the best sisters anyone could ask for." As the girls ran off to prepare more wedding cookies, Dennis stood at the entrance of the house and opened the front door. Snowflakes drifted in on the breeze, landing silently on the welcome mat. He stepped outside for a moment, looking out over the quiet, snowy town. The house behind him glowed with warmth, laughter echoing through its once silent halls. He turned, closed the door slowly behind him, and stood still for a beat. No longer a man of solitude, no longer a figure of success without love, he was now a husband, a father, and a man who had learned how to let people in. This wasn't just a house anymore. This was a home. And the family inside it, two pink-dress whirlwinds, a golden-haired woman who had knocked on his door, and a child not yet born, was his greatest Christmas gift of all. If this heartwarming Christmas tale of second chances and unexpected family warmed your heart, do not forget to subscribe to Kindness and Love Tales for more stories that celebrate love, hope, and the quiet magic of human connection. Every week, we bring you touching romances, emotional reunions, and the kind of moments that remind us of the beauty in kindness. Hit that subscribe button, like, and share this story with someone who believes in love that heals and beginnings born from snowy nights. Thank you for watching, and may your heart stay as warm as this ending.